Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We have an opportunity today to really get a good sense of what's happening in the Caribbean as a result of the coronavirus and COVID-19, however we refer to it. We have today on UWITV, we have the Acting Secretary General and CEO of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, Mr. Neal Walters. Have with us also the um, Director General and CEO of the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, Mr. Frank Comito. We're also delighted to have with us Dr. Michelle McLeod, who is the head of department and program director at the Center for Hotel and Tourism Management here in the Bahamas. So welcome, everyone. I think over the course of the next hour, we're going to just talk a little bit about Caribbean tourism. Needless to say, this is probably the biggest blow ever, well, certainly in our lifetimes, of Caribbean tourism, where so many of our source markets have shut down, so many of our destinations are shutting down or have shut down. And so it has a tremendous effect on tourism, which is necessarily a personal service business. So needless to say, when people start talking about social distancing, start talking about shelter in place, you can talk about some people working remotely, but certainly there's no such thing as a core part of our business ever working remotely. So I really want to begin with Neal Walters, the Acting Secretary General of CTO. And Neal, I believe we had a great pleasure last year of having the best year ever, Caribbean tourism in terms of numbers. Mm-hmm. And now we find ourselves in a completely different situation. Can you describe for us a little bit of where we are at the moment?
And thank you for this opportunity. First, let me say before I start to say anything that the Caribbean Tourism Organization's priority is the safety and health of the Caribbean, people of the Caribbean, and visitors. So, taking what Vincent said into consideration and everything, we have seen the closure of countries' source markets. We've seen the closure of the ports in of our member countries. We've seen the limited airline schedules and the berth cruise. So I think it's safe to say, in the absence of information at this time, that the tourism is severely impacted by COVID-19. Our members, where we get our information in terms of arrivals and expenditure and so on from, have been not necessarily slower than usual in reporting to us. So we don't have a firm picture of those numbers, but clearly we can tell that tourism is being severely impacted by COVID-19 at this time. I think that's the fairest assessment that we can make.
Yeah, well, that's certainly the view of the public sector side. We'll ask Frank for his views on the private sector side. Obviously, both of them have to work very much together, but if the private sector operations are not open and operating, we have severe issues. Frank, so just give us a sense of where we are at the moment.
Sure. I mean, we actually started coming back in January and started readiness activities with some of our partners at that point, including the Caribbean Public Health Agency, working with CTO, as well as the Global Tourism Resilience Center out of UWI, based housed through UWI in Kingston. What we've been doing is gauging. I mean, we've been doing a number of readiness and monitoring activities, but in terms of the impact on the industry, we really didn't see a massive impact until a couple of weeks ago. Until about 2 weeks ago, there was maybe 6-7% drop in occupancies and advanced bookings. As the travel advisories started increasing, obviously we started seeing a whole lot more, starting with in particular with Italy, and then as it spread throughout Europe and now into the U.S. and so on. With the reduction in air service, the travel advisories, the concerns of the public, valid concerns, we have seen an acceleration, a rapid acceleration over the past 2 weeks in not only cancellations and lack of access, but also closures, temporary suspension of activity, temporary closings by hotels in the region. You're going to see that ratchet up significantly over the next week or so as well.
Well, certainly, we have seen that, and I'm sitting here in the Bahamas, and the announcement of Atlantis and Bahama, which collectively by far the two biggest properties, and then of course Sandals. Um, Michelle, from your point of view, I mean, what is it that you are hearing regarding the status and the position of tourism in the region?
Thank you so much for your question, Vincent. You know, the Caribbean region receives over 60 million visitors, about 50% stayover visitors and 50% cruise visitors to this region. And since the COVID-19 crisis has come, you can say each week the region will receive 1 million less visitors. And so there are some countries who would be particularly impacted by this. The Bahamas receives over 7 million visitors, Dominican Republic over 6 million, and then we have Jamaica over 4 million visitors. And so we have to be very mindful of the economic impact on these countries. And of particular concern is the unemployment situation that has occurred with the closure of many businesses, many hotels throughout the region. You have taxi drivers who are without employment, store market vendors, and so it goes on in terms of the rippling effect of the slowdown or non-existent tourism industries throughout the region.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, Neil, you certainly set the right tone in terms of focusing on health and safety. Our business does not work without a focus on health and safety. Those two hurdles have to be overcome before people are coming to our destination. So we find ourselves now in a situation where you have both the visitor being concerned about health and safety, and of course, the people in their own country concerned about health and safety. So that is a kind of mix that doesn't move anywhere. So, given that kind of set of circumstances, what what are we doing now to begin to address this issue? Because I think we assume, but don't often say, I mean, tourism is far and away the biggest economic sector of the Caribbean region. So we have to begin to talk about what are we going to do to address this situation from today forward. Some of your thoughts from CTO?
Um, well, one of the things that and Frank mentioned a bit of it because CTO is in the mix with CHTA. One of the things that we have been doing is making sure that whatever we communicate to our members um, is based on information we receive from CARFA, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, because we recognize especially in an environment such as this one, we need to ensure that that the messaging that comes out is a definite correlation between tourism and health. So that over the last few weeks, um, basically from when we first got wind of this outbreak, this virus, and the fact that it could come to have been very closely with that our, our members are the tourists and boards of tourism, if you want to call it that, in the Caribbean, are aware of as many, if not all, of the issues related to COVID-19. So that when decisions are made by those entities, they are made with a full knowledge of the impact it can have both on the visitor and on um, the citizens of the destinations the visitors are coming to. Even before it actually became a crisis for us, we actually anticipated the fact that there would be some level of crisis management needed, and we have held discussions, webinars with our members to ensure that we try to mitigate against those circumstances. Frank mentioned the fact that we're collaborating with the CHTA, CARFA, and also the Global Tourism Resilience Center. And that's an attempt to make sure that our collective stakeholders, some of their stakeholders are not ours, to ensure that everyone, we win as much as can, to ensure everyone is sensitized to the effect of the virus. And then what we did recently, and this kind of flows with what Dr. McCloud was saying just now, is we actually have held a webinar with the Association of British Travel Agents. We have an arrangement with Euromonitor and Apple Leisure Group to try to sensitize our members as to how things are changing in the market. And that in itself too also is a form of bringing members' minds to fore on the idea of what happens next, what they can expect to happen in the immediate future, and then continuing those programs, help them to understand what they can look at more long term. And but the key thing that I think we are looking at here when you undercut everything is the fact that we're looking at trying to create a platform for collaboration among all tourism stakeholders, not just the public sector, not just the private sector, but recognizing that we all need to work together to ensure that we come out of this this outbreak as successfully as possible, if they can use that word at this time. But that's really where our underlying focus is: the collaboration, all sectors involved in this process to make sure that we can help each other up once the outbreak not dissipates, but the effects are reduced.
Yeah, Frank, you're essentially an association of associations all across the region. Have you found any difficulty among your member associations with agreeing with what many people think are pretty radical decisions by governments to shut down and focus on making sure that you slow down whatever contagion is? Have you seen any resistance in that at all? And some of the things I know, the other thing in terms of policy too, I mean, you began to craft something very early in terms of cancellation policies and how to address with that, because in your initial conversation, people don't seem yet that what is happening as much as anything else. It isn't just simply people are not coming. There are people who were booked to come that have canceled. So that has had an enormous impact on business. So what has been the reaction of your members?
Well, it's varied, but I think the biggest thing was shell shock. I mean, it was just people couldn't believe what was going on. What we tried to do early on was educate and inform people so they understood how serious it was and the measures they needed to put in place to protect employees as well as guests. And really, to their credit, CARFA did a workshop with us early on in, I think, fourth. We had over 400 participants in that. CARFA also worked with the industry, with CTO and CHTA a few years ago to develop an online confidential monitoring system. So we did a good push to get more hotels signed on to the monitoring system so that they could report incidents or seek professional advice through CARFA as well as local health agency in real time. And a lot of readiness had to go into play and informing and educating the public, because there was a lot of misinformation. There still is a lot of misinformation out there. So we also set up a resource center online called the COVID-19 Caribbean Tourism Resource Center. And that's available through the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association website, caribbeanhotelandtourism.com/COVID-19. And there's a lot of tools and information on there that we've been pushing. We're updating it constantly. As Vincent, as you said, we established some guidelines for cancellations because we were concerned about the image of the industry, as well as the need to recapture some of that business that we would lose. So we encouraged guidelines, minimal types of standards for guidelines for cancellations. by hotels, and also provided links. We provide online links to the cancellation policies of various brands and so on. So, I mean, we've just tried to be a resource and a conduit for good current information, and working with all of our CTOs, CARFA, and the Resilience Center, we've been able to garner other kinds of information, make sure it's current and relevant, and helping our people as much as possible. Getting is going to be very difficult, but we will get through it. And I think that's the key message is we have a track record, particularly tourism is incredibly resilient and it does rebound. There's historical evidence that's indisputable in that regard for the entire region. So, but it's going to be difficult. We've never seen anything like this.
Michelle, one of the things, certainly from your institution's point of view, is being able to get a sense of history about whether we have some examples of the past that we can draw on and conduct some research about how to assist from examples from tourism that happened before or some examples from elsewhere. Have you come across any study that can be drawn on that can educate, help the region of how to begin to recover from this?
Thanks for that question. Certainly, tourism recovery is an area of research that has been gaining interest, particularly with a number of catastrophic events happening. When you look at the tourism academic literature, what has been coming out relates a lot to natural disasters rather than what we are having now about infectious diseases. What has been of concern during such a crisis would be the messaging. How do you communicate to those persons involved during such a crisis event would be particularly important. Of course, although we see the closure of many of our tourism businesses, the UNWTO, they have stated clearly that travel should be safe and persons should travel responsibly. So the messaging is important in terms of that continuity in travel. And what we know that there are examples, for instance, of destinations such as Singapore who've gone through this and would have done certain initiatives. We need to capture those practices and learn from them. But what is of particular concern in our Caribbean region is that open skies policy. Of course, the Caribbean Tourism Organization, they have led in that regard. Issues around, for instance, Caribbean Airlines having that seventh freedom to not have to travel through the home state. That would become very important in terms of progressing and to help in a tourism recovery process.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly when we talk about what's happening within the region, I don't think anybody who will argue that we need to have much better intra-Caribbean air transportation. But also at the same time, I don't think you're going to find anybody who is going to argue that we absolutely need to have carriers, the global branded carriers, bringing people into the Caribbean also. So we need both. There's no question of that. But you know, I think it's important for us to talk a little bit about what has happened in the past. So H1N1 didn't come close to this. SARS didn't come close to this. But we have a track record in the Caribbean of the private and public sector getting together in order to make sure that we come out of this the bang, as opposed to coming out of it, easing our way out of it. And so I think Frank and Neal, whichever you want to start first, just talk a little bit about the lessons that we have from the past in terms of how we work together, private, public sector, in order to begin to ensure that once we get the all clear, that we are in the forefront of taking up whatever spent up demand, demand that is there.
Well, yeah. Looking back to the previous crises, at the end of the day, what was essentially done was is and I think the most current one, even though it's not necessarily a health crisis, was the hurricanes in 2017, which did not affect all of our member countries. But the fact is, the level of devastation was so significant, actually led to the Caribbean being viewed overall as being pretty much pummeled by in 17. And that to me is the most current recent lesson, because one of the things that was done was both sets of parties, the public sector and the private sector, working together to ensure that it was very clear, one, which countries were impacted by those storms, and then the second part was to ensure that the world as a whole recognized that the Caribbean was open for business, even if it was in a reduced way. But once those countries that were affected came back on stream, a significant amount of work was done to help them come back up to their previous levels. In terms of previous health issues, similarly, that we have to ensure is that the Caribbean's reputation remains intact. Um, this particular crisis, being one of global proportions, means that just like H1N1 and SARS, means that to a large extent we import the standards and the results and the effects from other parts of the world that have been affected before. What we have done is, in this particular case especially, I think, being very careful to ensure that we promote to the outside world the steps that we're being taken to ensure that healthy. And in my view, once we pass this crisis, it is not going to be a case where we need to now prove to people that we've been paying attention to those standards, but to show people once again how we can push our heads back above water, and that will require a collaborative effort between the public sector and the private sector. Destinations on the whole, which in some cases do the marketing and promotion in the marketplace, will need to get together with the chain of hotels. We'll need to get together with their smaller individual hotels to be able to once again show how come our shores and be as comfortable as possible. One thing that is certain, though, I think, is that we will, of necessity, more than likely, given some of the economic changes that are expected to occur, likely see some changes in focus and in who needs to travel. And I think that also is something, not preempting any other discussion. We need to look. We need to pay attention to who we will now be marketing to in the future, and how we will be doing it. It's a case where everybody will be pretty much thrown back into the mix, and the gains and the positives that we have had as the Caribbean may not necessarily exist anymore. But we have to work together to ensure that we can recapture that market share that we had before.
Frank?
Right. And no, I agree with Neal fully. But I think it's all about differentiation as well coming out of this. So the world's going to need the Caribbean, in my view,
Yep.
as they come out of this to help heal. We are one of the best places in the world where you can come to heal and get well again. So we've got tremendous assets in that regard. And I believe if we do it in a collaborative way, we can market and public relations our way through this as we've done in the past. In 2017, Neal made reference. We collaborated. We pooled our resources together, public and private sector, not in a big way, but we did it in terms of outreach to training, to travel partners, to educate, to the press, the consumer press, the trade press, constantly providing them with updates, information, interesting things that were going on in the region in terms of comeback. But also, we pooled a small amount of money together to do social media advertising and around a campaign theme, which I think can still work. The Caribbean, the rhythm never stops. So there's an example there where we were able to recover much faster than the experts thought we would recover. And I'll explain that in a second. Vincent, you'll remember very Life Needs the Caribbean, which was a
Right.
campaign, I believe, in 2001
Uh,
after
yeah.
9/11.
That's correct.
Public and
Yeah.
private sectors came together, pooled their resources, came up with some creative approaches. Life needs the Caribbean. That's pretty darn powerful message. And I believe it resonates maybe in a different way now as well, but it's the same kind of theme. Uh, the the World Travel and Tourism Council has done some research on how long it takes for a destination or an area to recover. They looked at SARS, they looked at the tsunamis, they looked at other kinds of disasters on the world. And in 2017, they did some research for the Caribbean in terms of how long they anticipated it would take for the region, because the whole region was affected by the 2017 hurricanes because of what we call a contagion effect, where the public felt that the entire Caribbean was devastated. But and they figured it would take years for the Caribbean to rebound and be on course to where it was before that. Well, most of our destinations that were directly in, but the entire Caribbean was well before that. But those that were directly affected, it took them 2.5 years to rebound, and mostly, and some of the destinations rebounded fully already prior to this incident. But so we know that we will bounce back. We know that the history shows that. We know that the goods, if you will, in terms of the quality of our product, the attractiveness and appeal of our product. We've got to continue to be on our game product, use the downtime that we have right now to improve our product, to assess what we can do it better. And as Neal said, I think we've got public and private sector, we've got to begin a serious conversation about pooling our resources, pulling our key players together, public and private sector, and basically saying, okay, we're going to come out of this. What do we need to be planning around now to be able to come out of it? There's some advocacy, public relations, investments in marketing and public relations things that we need to step up to the plate on, and it's going to require some resources and commitments by our respective organizations at a level I think we've never had before.
No, I was just going to add, at the end of the day, and it's following on from something Frank said, and I missed saying this earlier, the Caribbean is going from a position where we had a market share. And the funny thing is that everyone had a market share. And essentially now we're in a case where there's really no market share. We are going to have to find really creative ways to ensure that we can step ahead of the rest of the game, if I can call it that. And our natural resources and the things that make the Caribbean good and great are the things that we are going to have to highlight. We're going to have to basically be able to sell the beauty essentially of the Caribbean, the things in the Caribbean that will differentiate us, to Frank's point, from everybody else around the world as quickly as possible and as clear a way as possible, so that we ensure that market share we had before, we can even regain some of it in the face of others who will be doing exactly the same thing. Once we come out of this crisis, there will be very, very little time to waste, if any.
Which is one of the reasons I was very happy that UWI is organizing this, is because I think there are some wonderful case studies that we have that we ourselves can learn from, that we have executed successfully in the past. I think we need to let people know about these, and certainly we need to let UWI and the students at UWI study tourism and hospitality to understand why we are so proud of the collaboration between the public and private sector whenever crisis. See, we forget to some degree that people started traveling to the Caribbean initially for health reasons. They came here because it was such a salubrious atmosphere that they came here in order to improve their health. That was the beginning of travel in the Caribbean. Then we forget that when we go back to the Gulf War, back in the early 1990s, the Caribbean private and public sector came together and ran a campaign using the Beach Boys music, which was current at the time. And there are a lot of people today who are not even born then and don't know what we are talking about. But it was an opportunity for us to show how we can work together. Then in 2001, and Frank and Neal talked about it earlier, we came up with this theme Life needs the Caribbean. What better theme right now to begin to talk about that when the all there comes along in terms of being able to, and then more than anything else, we talk about private and public sector collaboration. The public sector, with all the governments of the Caribbean, the majority, and the private sector got together and came up and spent money together, inviting people to come to the Caribbean, as opposed to just trying to go and do it individually. And the synergy from that, we have a graph that we can show the world that both of those efforts had substantial positive impact on the region. So a great part of what I think all of this is all about, not only scratching our heads and wondering what to do. In effect, we know what to do. We have done some of these things before. But also at the same time, I think right now, while we're in the doldrums, this is the time, I think, as both Frank and Neal were saying, to begin to prepare a plan that is going to enable us to take biggest advantage of that pent-up demand for travel, where we can begin to grab the largest market share and get ourselves ready for that. I mean, the Keynesian economics says that whenever private sector demand disappears, the public sector comes forward and begin to replace that demand and make sure that we have ourselves putting in place the infrastructure and the platforms necessary to be successful as time comes out. So from a UWI point of view, Dr. McLeod, I think we got a really good story to tell. And I think we're going to find the same kind of collaboration among the governments and the private sector of the Caribbean coming out of this at the right time in order to begin to get, I think, Neal, a better market share than we had before when this whole thing started. So I think that's part of where UE capturing that, I think, has great value in the future.
Yes, I certainly believe the University of the West Indies can contribute in the tourism recovery process. We started the UWI COVID-19 task force, and the task force comprises a number of experts across the disciplines, scientists, economists, tourism experts, and the focus would be on bringing the best knowledge to inform the response that we should have in this Caribbean region. Certainly, the task force through UWITV, this particular um, channel, and also we have established a website to be able to inform everyone, policymakers, decision makers, private sector, public sector, across the board, and the general public, of course, across the board, to ensure that the relevant, timely information is getting out there to persons across the region.
Let me just ask a question that Michelle certainly asked me about, is there any reason to believe that the image of the Caribbean in any way, shape, or form is going to take a hit from this, or Neal, and then Frank?
Mhm. Well, I mean, you- I think that actually we have done a lot of stuff that can actually assist mitigating that process by ensuring, as we mentioned, both of us before, the fact that we have been, ensuring that certain standards are being maintained when it comes to health and so on, so that during the period of this crisis, our track record was sure that there was no cavalier attempts or any kind of actions that stepped out of what have become pretty much international standards for dealing with this crisis. You need to be able to show them that you're following the game plan that larger countries are following, the World Health Organization, the CDC, and so on, and that you've taken the necessary measures to ensure that health safety. Um, so that once this ends and we keep following those guidelines, we keep ensuring that things are being done to show that we are a responsible destination, the Caribbean. And fortunately to date, pretty much all of our destinations are following effectively a similar game plan. I think that if there is any kind of effect on us, it might actually, it would likely not be negative. It would be a case where the Caribbean will be seen as a responsible destination at the end of the day.
Frank?
I don't see any indication of any downsides yet. I think even though different countries have handled this in different ways in the region, I think they've all, their intentions have been the best, and they've all done what they felt was best for their nations. I think CARFA, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, which was formed by CARICOM a number of years ago,
Mhm.
has an incredibly positive and constructive mindset about tourism, about its importance. I think the region, the governments of the region have a good mindset about tourism and its importance, which we didn't see 20 years ago. And I think that's positive. I think people realize that this is a core strength of our economic and livelihood, and we need to protect and enhance it. So I see a lot of positive. And of course, anything could happen. Silly. I think we've got to address the cruise industry in a different way than we have in the past. They've had their challenges with this. They do a lot of good things, but they need to do a whole lot better for the Caribbean, not only for tourism, but for the countries of the Caribbean. And I think there may be a lesson learned out of this on that we may be able to pull them in and work with them in a way which we haven't been able to date. So there may be some positive out. I know globally they're taking a big image hit, and they'll continue to take that hit. So they're going to need us more than we need them, I believe, at this point, as countries, not necessarily the hotel part of the industry, but we're all in this together, and I think they need to change their behaviors regarding the region as well. Environmental practices, in terms of how they work with us, in terms of revenue retention, increasing the revenue retention into the region and being a better player that way. We shall see if that happens, but I think it's an opportunity. But we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and I think we've got a lot of good willing people and some incredible people in our destinations on the public and private sector side. And I think we're going to be our way through this if we make solid commitments to collaborate, coordinate, and work together.
I can tell you, I will wager that the Caribbean is going to come out of this looking even better for a very peculiar reason. I mean, I am very much surprised at a region that is the most tourism dependent region in the world, that many of our countries were ahead of many of the other countries in the world and ahead of some of the other states in the world in doing the right kinds of things. So I'm really very proud of the region in terms of focusing on doing the right thing, despite knowing that this was going to take an enormous hit on certainly our economies. And going to Michelle again, if you can hear us, Michelle, if you can hear me. Um, Again, we used to have all kinds of people who were hesitating about how important tourism was to the Caribbean. I mean, if you ever try to find the most unwelcome example of how important tourism is to the region, we're going through it right now. So the other positive thing that's going to come on the backside of this is people beginning to understand something that we have talked about a long time, and it sounds very academic, about the direct, indirect, and induced taxes and also employment. That we have not done a good job in the past of explaining to our governments how important the induced and direct and indirect taxes and employment are. I don't think we have to do that anymore. They're beginning to see that in ways that we wish we never had to show, but there's no question about that. I mean, it's from an academic point of view, Michelle, are there some studies that we think we can begin to initiate and begin to show that? Because I think recording some of this stuff is going to all be to the good.
Yes, Vincent, very important really to keep a record as to how things are evolving, how things are progressing, what some tourism destinations are doing, what are some of the best practices out there that we can learn from. Very important to record. And of course, as the university's COVID-19 task force, we have started to do some of that and to put some of the information out there. But specifically relating to the tourism sector, while there are a number of agencies looking at studies, the IDB, the CDB, of the economic impact. I think what would be particularly important is to look at the social impact, the socio-cultural impact, because you have a number of persons who would have lost their jobs, and how are they going to um, get some kind of means of survival? Of course, there are a number of social systems that are coming um, on stream to handle some of these matters, but we need to look at crises such as this, where the tourism industry will not be functioning for several months. What would be the likely sociocultural impact on our Caribbean societies? And I think as well, one area that has been lacking in research in this region is the travel industry. Looking at the travel needs, looking at the airlines, our interregional airlines in particular, looking at our airport operations, looking at health and safety issues surrounding that. I think that would be a very important stream of research going forward, and the University of the West Indies intends to contribute to that.
Yeah, and there's no question about that. And we find ourselves in the situation where I don't think we're going to find anybody at the end of this saying anything other than it's very important. But Frank, I'd like to go back to something that you talked about a little bit about the cruise sector, in terms of how that sector is now being viewed, the challenges that they have at the moment. I'm really going back to your comment, but Neal, feel free to weigh in on it. I mean, two things I see happening. One is there are areas of our economy that rely very heavily on the cruise business. I mean, one of the things that we used to talk about is really the average spend, where the average spend really is almost meaningless, is what's the total spend is and who is getting that spend in terms of what it is. I mean, stockbrokers make a pittance on each stock trade, but if you do a million of them, you get a lot of income. So the idea, I think, is really beginning to understand that segment also, but also a great deal more, but also at the same time, I think you're going to find the cruise industry coming back that is much more integrated into the land and the destinations that they're calling on, as a result of what has happened to show that they're part of the Caribbean community, which is a hugely important part of their total business. So, Neal, any thoughts on that particular?
Look, one of the things that I mean, if even if the cruise lines did not see it before, and I mean I'm speaking about this in against the context of of some cruise lines being members of the CTO, um, is the fact that when I mean, and I'm going to use that example when the cruise lines were birthed, as they have been in some countries, it was necessary for the persons on those cruise ships to transition to hotels until they could be airlifted out, or whatever the case may be. I think that things like that, the necessity that this crisis has brought on, will show all the different sectors of the industry, all the different players in this in, in this industry, the fact that we all work to ensure is built up as strong as possible. At the end of the day, though, I think we have to be mindful that our new tourism product needs to be looked at holistically, and looked at from the point of view of all the players, right down to the taxi men, right down to the attractions, and so on and so forth. Because, yes, I mean, I'm going to step away from the cruise lines for a minute. We need to look at the fact that all of these persons, all of these groups that we don't necessarily look at on an ongoing basis, have been significantly impacted. And whereas one group or another group might be able to be more resilient in this crisis and come out of it, it's a case where we need to look at it so that all groups in the future, or all the different sections, the persons contributing to the industry, can be able to ride out something like this without too much of a negative. So I think, yes, I agree. There is the opportunity for our crews to be more properly integrated, but I'm going to take it a step further and say I think there's an opportunity for all the different areas to be better integrated and to be more properly looked at as where they fit in and how they impact and so on and so forth.
You know, one of the areas, Frank, that was going quite rapidly before um, we started going through what we're going through now was the peer-to-peer business. And you had a lot more
Yeah.
individuals who were directly involved in providing services and receiving income directly from visitors.
Hmm.
Any thoughts on whether you think that's going to continue, to what degree that is affecting the hotel sector in terms of that business? What are your thoughts on that? I mean, a lot of people at a number of destinations by the hundreds were beginning to host people directly, and many people saw it as a very positive thing. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a positive thing. I think it's and we've been doing a lot of research and work with the whole sharing economy sector for about 5 years. Um, I think it's just as we've said for a number of years, and many governments are moving in that direction. It just needs to be better regulated and taxed. And I think under these circumstances, we're even seeing some areas where the regulatory part needs to be strengthened. We're seeing that as a result of this crisis situation as well. I think it's an opportunity for lessons learned and how do we get better at not only regulating it but taxing it, but also how do we recognize that there's work to do, both public and private sector. To Neal's point, capacity building. How do we strengthen their ability as owners of small little enterprises that are trying to get a small slice of the pie, but they want a slice of the pie? So we're embarking right now at CHDA on a series of trainings and webinars to help improve during this downtime. How do you improve your capacity and your capability to be more effective operationally, service-wise? I mean, a range of areas. There's a great opportunity now to broaden training. As I was listening to Neal, we should be doing training for taxi drivers, for vendors, and other kinds of things right now. We, the collective we, it's not just on CHDA, but as we're looking at our training, I'm looking at subject areas that we're going to cover in training, and I'm listening to Neal earlier, and I'm saying, well, geez, there's other kinds of training that we can do, and awareness and capacity building, and even coping with stress. How do you manage your money during these difficult times? What difficulties a lot of our people are going through. There's some goodwill kinds of things that are important to people's livelihoods that we could do now as well. Unfortunately, we don't have an incredible safety net. We have some destinations like that have national insurance that or unemployment insurance that'll cover people partially in bad times. We have some companies that do incredible things with their employees, but not all have the capability to do that. Some of them don't have the mindset they should to do that. But how do we improve that kind of engagement as well to the benefit of our people? I mean, we're a people business, and we're going to rebound, and those companies and destinations that rebound faster are going to rebound in part because their people are embracing tourism again. And if a company is not treating their employees as best as they could, again, everybody has their own circumstances and may not have the financial wherewithal to help out employees during these difficult times. But those that are able to will see that returned in the level of loyalty and hospitality, and it's the customers that are going to feel that more than the companies ultimately, and ultimately I guess the companies as well. So there's some other things we can do. This session's just helping me to look at our training approach and our readiness approach a little differently.
Yeah, no, there's no question that that's exactly the kind of things we should be doing in this period of time. Michelle, I'm trying to figure out if there's a way for us to have your department become the repository for so much of the knowledge that we are talking about, some of the challenges we are talking about. Because if you look at it, I mean, there is some kind of some kind of pathogen that comes around almost every decade or so that becomes a real problem. So to begin to see what we did today that we could have done better, is there a way for UE to become the repository of kind of best and worst practices about how to address these things? And I'd like to just kind of get a quick comment on that before we start talking about kind of toward the end of what we do to make sure we come out of this with a bang. But Michelle?
Thanks for that, Vincent. Yes, certainly the University of the West Indies, we can be a repository for the information that is needed to inform the industry to come out of this crisis that we now face. We have the Center for Hotel and Tourism Management based in the Bahamas, and the Center for Tourism and Policy Research, and the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center, both based in Jamaica. And we are ready to contribute in terms of bringing together the research capacity, look at the best and worst practices out there with international and, of course, the Caribbean Tourism Organization and the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, working collaboratively to ensure that we gather the needed information to inform the recovery process. And I look forward for that happening in the very near future.
No, that certainly, but I think before we end, what I'd like to talk a little bit about is certainly with Neal and Frank, you know, where do we go from here? What is it that we need to do on behalf of the industry and the people in the region to make sure we are delivering the very best outcome once the all clear is given? What are some of your thoughts? Certainly, Neal.
Well, I mean, I think we've spoken about some of it already in terms of retraining staff. I think something that we didn't really look at before was probably looking at new business strategies, and incorporated in there will be new marketing strategies, because there is the potential at the end of this for who we market to change as well. I mean, we really don't know what is going to be the case down the line after this is the end of this year. But at least look at retraining staff, looking at new business strategies. And if it is possible, and I mean, because I know at this point in time, funds are going to be very limited. If it is possible, and based on the nature of the entity, even look at renewing plant, because something that was discussed for a long time in the Caribbean was the fact that the plant needs to be renewed. And this is a prime opportunity now, if people can afford to do it, to look at something like that, to come out with a new look, almost a new lease on life. But all of these things I think need to be done, in the context of sustainability. Tourism for the longest time has been, for a lot of our countries, and in some cases the only source of revenue. I mean, all things considered. Um, this is a case now where countries have actually lost pretty much all of that revenue, so that you have people in countries who will be essentially saying, well, we have nothing with tourism. We need to ensure that we can put ourselves right back up, so that, again, as was discussed before, once these issues end, the COVID-19 outbreak, we need to ensure that we are there, ready to act, ready to start, ready to restart business in as holistic a way as possible. Um, and at the end of the day, it's a case where we've kind of skirted around it, and we haven't actually touched it, as but we really do need to ensure that the maximum benefit is being received by by pretty much all involved in tourism. So that at the end, while I agree, and it's going to be a tough time going forward, I think we can look at ways by looking at more community tourism, things like that, that we can ensure that a better slice of the pie, for lack of a better way to put it, is shared among all of our Caribbean nationals. Um, some people now have been barely eking out an existence, but it might be it's necessary for us to look at helping people, as Frank went on to say, build capacity to ensure that they have a level of savings, to ensure that they have that safety net built up. If people are barely making it, they will not be able to do that. So I think we need to widen that net to allow people to make the most benefit out of tourism, not just for, let's say, the big players, but for all of our citizens. Because at the end of the day, without tourism, there's really nothing that we can ramp back up to once this crisis is done. We need to find a way to do it in a much more holistic fashion.
No question about that. Frank?
What we're seeing in the region are we're seeing pockets of collaboration, and I want to underscore this word collaboration because we talk it a lot, but we don't do it sufficiently well enough at both the local and the regional level. But we've got our ear to the ground, and we're watching how a number of destinations over the past week, some are working very effectively within their own sectors as well as with government as well, public and private sector. And we're seeing that. And I think those destinations that are out of the gate already in that area are going to come back faster. We need to see more of that throughout the region, and as organizations, both CTO and CHTA, and with support from others, I think we need to lead on that. We've done some things in the past collaboratively. Some of them we've done well, some of them we've struggled with. CTO and CHTA, public and private sector, and broadening it even beyond our traditional sphere of participation, even though CTO's mandated with countries that are member countries, looking at how do we go beyond that. Same thing with the CHTA, how do we go beyond the traditional participants, if you will, of destinations and federation members in the region. So we need to challenge ourselves because this requires a level of collaboration, coordination, resource sharing, unlike we've never seen before for our industry. And from our end, I know our leadership wants to commit to that, and I believe that sense exists in many of the destinations that CTO represents as well. There's a great opportunity here. It would be a shame to waste it.
There are a number of people now sitting at home, going back to Neal's broad sense of renewal. There are a lot of people sitting at home now. They have nowhere to go to work because of what has happened in the industry. There are some places we can steer them to go take a look at improving their skills, their knowledge, their capacity to deliver even better when it comes to what can we where can we point them? Frank, I think you got some stuff you can talk about there.
Yeah, I mean, we just had a conversation this morning with our education foundation, and we've got a task force that we're putting together tomorrow. I think we're meeting tomorrow or Wednesday to discuss a range of types of training, types of things that we can do. What are the subject areas? But not only in terms of skills types of training, but coping types of training, and looking ahead, what are the marketing and public relations strategies that could be, adopted and developed and shared and so on. So we're getting ready to rev up a lot of training, and I think if we can do more of that with our education foundation, doing it with some of the institutions that we've worked with on scholarship programs in the past, like UWI, like FIU, like Johnson and Wales, and so on, and La Roche, and so we're actually starting those discussions in earnest, we should take advantage of this. I don't know how long the downtime, the ice is going to be. It could be anywhere from a couple of weeks to months, and so we need to ready ourselves now.
And if somebody wants to find that information, they will have it on the CHTA site for a link for people to go and take a look at, I'm sure.
right. We're developing it right. We're just having the conversations in the past couple of days, and we're formalizing a task force uh, on on Wednesday to look at the various optional approaches that we have for some of this.
And Michelle, how can we do a better job of providing your students and anybody associated with UWI with more information about what has been done, what can be done, what is being thought of being done? How can we do a much better job of that?
Yes, there is need to do a better job of getting the information out there. And so it is hoped that a coming together of the various agencies will form a collaborative platform that will continue to inform what we do in this region in terms of tourism recovery. Certainly, the COVID-19 task force, we have a website through initiatives being currently done by UWITV to get expert information out there to inform persons as to what is happening would be very important in the next couple of weeks. Certainly, we can look at the performance data already being obtained by the Caribbean Tourism Organization and the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association and start to do some of the data mining. I know the CTO, they have been phenomenal in gathering a lot of the data internationally and giving access to their membership of the relevant information that persons would need to make certain decisions. What we need to do is harness that data in open format where persons can easily access the information and be able to make appropriate and timely decisions. And another part of that is dissemination of the information, ensuring that the persons who need to make the right decisions have the information at hand. It is not guesswork or not necessarily following what others do, but being able to make the information available from whether it's the World Health Organization, the United Nations, World Tourism Organization, being able to get that information out there to everyone who would need it.
Well, I think Neal, I know that there have been a number of programs, and you may want to talk about a couple in particular from CTO that really have been doing a wonderful job of beginning to train a number of people. So you may want to talk about some of that and where people can find the information.
Okay. One of the things that I know our human resources department was looking at ramping that back up, even in this kind of environment, is we've had a couple. We have a certification program, Hospitality Assured, which even though some of the businesses are closed, we're still looking at ones that are open to see if we can get them brought closer to being certified during this period, as long as they can, as long as they're open or even can facilitate the certification process. In addition to that, what we're doing in the background is, and I mean, maybe this is not necessarily, well, I'll say it. The fact is we're looking as well long term at things that could actually affect the Caribbean even past this crisis, so that we are still continuing development of an online program in terms of looking at a sustainable tourism for the Caribbean, which will obviously have to having some tweaks now given this particular crisis, but also incorporated in that online platform is like a disaster mitigation course or component as well. Again, this action we're going through now, this crisis will actually be need to tweak some of that information to incorporate it. Um, at the end of the day, the CTO continues to provide where possible, because a lot of our stuff was face to face. but I know we will have to adjust it in terms of making sure that our members, where possible, can still access it. There will be a level of training coming up very shortly in terms of accessing our relationship with Euromonitor, where which is actually an agency out of Europe, in terms of us looking at statistical information, etc., that our members can actually use during this period to see when that part of the world, and they also cover US and Canada, actually, I should say, are actually how they're changing in this crisis. So there are a number of things that we're doing. Again, like Frank, some of these things may not necessarily be on our website, onecaribbean.org, but we are going through a process of ensuring that all of these things, plus any additional things that I've not mentioned, are available, any resources for our members to access. We also continue to post the information from the Caribbean Public Health Agency, which is still very critical at this point in time. And all those things will also be are if what they're already available on our website, but they'll continue to be. And going forward, we're going to try to focus that information in a way that's a lot more easily accessible by the public.
Very good. Before we close, I'd like to invite Michelle again. Any final thoughts on this? I think we are coming close to our hour that we were allowed. Any final thoughts, closing thoughts, Michelle?
Well, in closing, I really hope that this COVID-19 crisis is short term and that we will start to see some management of the crisis in a way that the tourism destinations will be able to recover in as short as possible time. Certainly, I look forward to ongoing discussions, conversations with our regional partners, with other tourism industry experts like yourself, Vincent, to really try and get the relevant information out there to persons. I think it's important that they know that something is happening in the region, what is happening, and how do they communicate with all of their clients, their customers, their intermediaries, their marketers, getting the relevant information out there. And I think UWITV, being across 15 countries in the region, will be an important partner in that regard.
Very good. Frank, any closing comments?
Yeah, I just think that, I mean, we've got to be mindful that we're going to get through all of this. And we will be better ultimately as a result of it, despite the temporary dark clouds that's hovering over us. The sun shines on the Caribbean always, and I'm confident we'll continue to do so. And as we come through this, the world will need the Caribbean to help it to heal, and I think we will be ready for that.
Neal?
Yes, I what I'm going to say is for our members after the 2017 hurricanes, when the statement was we need to build back better. I think that after this COVID-19 experience, we need to come back better. And I think that like has been shared by all of my colleagues on the panel, the Caribbean does stand in a position to come back stronger, and we are at a very pivotal point in our history where we can really show the world the resilience of the Caribbean and the Caribbean brand, and be ready for business once COVID-19 has passed.
Well, thank you, panelists. Thank you all very much. I'd like to thank Neal Walters, who is the Acting Secretary General of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, Frank Comito, who is the CEO and Director General of the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, and the person who was most instrumental in making this happen, Dr. Michelle McLeod, who is head of the department for the Center for Hotel and Tourism Management at the University of the West Indies. Thank you all very much. I hope we can do this another time soon with even better connections. But I think we need to recognize that we are all, except perhaps for Neal, we are all sheltering in place. So whatever we have available to us at home is what we're using. Thank you all. Look forward to the next time for a continuing discussion. Thanks.